The morning sun cast long shadows across the earthen plaza as Ayanna pressed her palm against the rough bark of the ancient cottonwood that had witnessed 47 seasons of water councils. This gathering would be different from all the others, and every person in the village could feel the weight of finality hanging in the desert air like heat shimmer. For 3 moons, the representatives from the 5 canal districts had argued over water rights while their crops withered, and children went to sleep listening to their mothers sing lullabies about rain that never came. Feeling drawn to stories from this fascinating period in history? Subscribe so you never miss our next journey into the world before contact. The canal system that sustained their village had been carved from the desert floor by their ancestors 7 generations ago, when the great-grandfather spirits had spoken to the water finder in dreams. Those sacred channels carried snowmelt from distant mountains through an intricate network of headgates, check dams, and earthen levees that required constant maintenance and absolute cooperation between the various clans that depended upon them. Each district had developed its own relationship with the precious water, its own ceremonies and obligations, its own understanding of what constituted fair distribution when abundance flowed and desperate need when drought struck. The Canal of the Morning Star served the families who grew the 3 sacred sisters of corn, beans, and squash in the fertile plots near the village center. The Evening Star Channel wound through terraced gardens where medicinal plants and cotton grew under careful tending. The Serpent's Path carried water to the outlying fields where sunflowers stretched toward the sky and tobacco plants prepared for harvest ceremonies. The 4th District controlled the channels that fed the reed beds where basket makers gathered their materials and waterfowl nested during migration seasons. The 5th District, smallest but perhaps most crucial, maintained the sacred springs and the channels that filled the community wells where pottery makers gathered clay and children learned to swim. But this season had tested every agreement their ancestors had negotiated. The snowpack in the distant mountains had failed for the 2nd consecutive year, and the spring floods that normally recharged their system had dwindled to a trickle by the time the planting moon appeared. As water levels dropped, old resentments surfaced like bones exposed in drought-cracked earth. The Morning Star District accused the Evening Star families of taking more than their traditional share during the crucial germination period. The Evening Star representatives countered that the Serpent's Path cultivators had altered their headgates without community permission, stealing flow during the night hours when guardians slept. The 4th District elders claimed that their reed beds, essential for the community's basket-making trade with distant villages, were being sacrificed to maintain unnecessary decorative gardens in the wealthier districts. The 5th District waterkeeper, an elderly woman whose grandmother had first negotiated the current distribution system, watched these accusations fly back and forth while keeping her own counsel about the sacred springs that bubbled up from deep beneath the earth. She alone knew that those springs were showing signs of stress, producing less water and carrying strange tastes that spoke of underground changes too profound for surface politics to address. By midsummer, the situation had deteriorated beyond normal seasonal tensions. Families from different districts avoided each other in the central market, children played in separate groups according to which canal served their homes, and the usual inter-district marriages that strengthened community bonds had ceased as parents worried about allying with clans that might not survive the coming hardships. The traditional rotation schedule for water distribution had broken down entirely as each district sought to protect its own interests. Night raids occurred as desperate farmers attempted to divert extra flow to their dying crops. Fist fights broke out at the major junction points where multiple channels converged. Most troubling of all, the young people had begun to speak of abandoning the village entirely, seeking their fortunes in the trading centers along the great river to the east, where water flowed year-round and opportunity beckoned to those willing to leave their ancestral lands behind. The Council of District Representatives had met 11 times since the crisis began, and each gathering had ended with harsh words and hardened positions. Some called for a complete redistribution of water rights based on current population numbers rather than historical claims. Others demanded that the sacred obligations established by their ancestors be honored regardless of present difficulties. A few voices suggested that certain districts should be abandoned entirely, their populations relocated to areas where water remained more reliable, but such proposals touched upon questions of identity and belonging that went far deeper than mere survival. Ayana's own position as the chosen representative of the Evening Star District carried weight that extended beyond her 28 years of life experience. Her great-grandmother had been present at the founding of the current water treaty, and her family's memory stretched back to the time when the village had nearly perished during the great drought that lasted 7 seasons. She carried within her the stories of how cooperation had saved their people then, but she also understood that this crisis might be different, might require solutions that honored the past while adapting to unprecedented circumstances. As she walked the familiar paths between her district's gardens in the pre-dawn darkness, she noticed details that spoke of the severity of their situation. Cotton plants that should have been chest-high stood barely knee-high with leaves already yellowing from stress. Corn stalks showed gaps in their rows where seeds had failed to germinate in the moisture-starved earth. Bean vines climbed their support poles with desperate intensity, reaching for morning dew that evaporated before it could penetrate the hard-pan soil. The medicinal gardens that her district was famous for maintaining showed the most heartbreaking signs of decline, with rare healing plants that had taken generations to establish now struggling for survival in conditions their roots had never experienced. But what troubled Ayana most deeply was not the immediate crisis, but the longer implications of the choices they faced. Her grandmother had often spoken of the responsibility each generation carried to leave something better for those who would follow, to be ancestors worthy of reverence rather than cautionary tales told around winter fires. The canal system represented more than efficient water distribution. It embodied the accumulated wisdom of countless individuals who had chosen cooperation over competition, community survival over individual advantage. If they abandoned those principles now, if they allowed desperation to drive them toward solutions that enriched some districts at the expense of others, what kind of legacy would they leave for their children's children? Yet the alternative might be even worse. Maintaining traditional agreements while crops failed and families scattered might leave them all equally impoverished, custodians of empty principles in an abandoned village where only the cottonwood trees remained to remember their noble intentions. As the morning star began to fade against the lightening sky, Ayana made her way toward the council plaza where the final water council would convene. She carried with her a leather pouch containing 7 small stones that her great-grandmother had given her, each one taken from a different section of the original canal system. These stones had been present at every major water council for 3 generations, witnesses to decisions that had shaped their community's destiny. Today, they would witness what might be the most important decision their people had ever faced. Each representative who gathered that morning carried similar burdens, though their specific concerns reflected the unique character and needs of their districts. Kiva, the Morning Star representative, bore the responsibility of speaking for 43 families whose corn, bean, and squash fields fed not only their own people but provided surplus that sustained the village's trade relationships with distant communities. His weathered hands showed the calluses of someone who had spent his adult years managing the intricate timing required to maximize crop yields from limited water supplies. The pressure of feeding so many families weighed heavily upon him, but he also understood that the Morning Star District's prosperity had historically depended upon the specialized knowledge and materials provided by the other districts. Nayeli from the Evening Star District brought with her the concerns of the healers and cotton growers whose work required different rhythms of water usage than food production. Her district had always prided itself on maintaining the medicinal plants that provided healing remedies for the entire village, and the potential loss of rare species that took decades to establish created pressures that extended far beyond immediate survival. Saya, representing the Serpent's Path cultivators, spoke for families whose sunflower and tobacco crops served ceremonial and trade purposes that connected their village to spiritual and economic networks spanning hundreds of miles of desert terrain. The waterwork shaped over generations that connected these diverse districts had required generations of refinement and expansion to reach its current sophisticated form. Main channels carved directly into the desert floor followed natural contours that carried water efficiently across long desert reaches, while smaller lateral channels distributed flow to specific growing areas through a system of adjustable headgates and check dams. Earthen levees reinforced with stone and brush protected cultivated areas from flash floods while allowing controlled access to floodwater that recharged underground storage areas during rare but essential rainy periods. The entire system depended upon maintenance techniques passed down through family lines, with each generation adding innovations while preserving the accumulated wisdom of their predecessors. Wooden headgates could be adjusted to direct flow precisely where needed, while stone and brush check dams slowed water movement to prevent erosion and allow maximum infiltration into thirsty soil. Clay-lined channels in critical areas prevented seepage loss, while carefully placed spillways protected the main arteries from damage during unexpected flood events. But this season had pushed every component of the system beyond its designed capacity, as unprecedented drought conditions revealed vulnerabilities that previous generations had never been forced to address. The representatives arrived at the council ground as the sun cleared the eastern ridges and sent long spears of light across the packed earth plaza. Each delegation carried with them the hopes and fears of their constituents, along with proposals that had been debated and refined through long nights of discussion in individual districts. The Morning Star District presented a plan for rationing based on crop types, arguing that food production should take priority over other uses during emergency conditions. The Evening Star Group proposed a rotation system that would allow each district to receive full flow for designated periods while others abstained entirely. The Serpent's Path cultivators advocated for seasonal redistribution that would allocate more water during planting and harvest times while reducing flow during dormant periods. The 4th District suggested pooling resources to dig additional wells that might tap into groundwater sources not yet explored. The 5th District waterkeeper remained silent through the presentation of these various proposals, her weathered hands folded over the bundle of prayer sticks she carried as symbols of her connection to the sacred springs. When the formal proposals had been heard and discussed, when the arguments for each approach had been presented and challenged, she rose slowly and spoke for the first time since the council had convened. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had tended the sacred springs for 35 years, who had watched water levels rise and fall with cycles that stretched beyond individual lifespans. She spoke of underground rivers that flowed according to their own mysterious patterns, of springs that had run dry for many seasons before returning with renewed vigor, of the delicate balance that connected their small community to watersheds that extended far beyond their knowledge or control. But most importantly, she spoke of choices their ancestors had made during previous crises, decisions that had preserved the community's integrity even when easier options had presented themselves. She reminded them of the sharing moon tradition, when districts with surplus water had willingly reduced their own allocations to support neighbors facing shortfalls. She recounted stories of the Year of 3 droughts, when innovative engineering had extended their canal system into previously untapped areas through cooperative labor that drew upon the skills of every family. She described the renewal ceremony that had been created to acknowledge water as a living gift that required gratitude and careful stewardship, rather than mere exploitation. Her words carried the weight of accumulated experience, but more than that, they carried the wisdom of someone who had learned to listen to the land itself, to read the subtle signs that spoke of deeper patterns than human urgency could comprehend. As the waterkeeper's words settled over the gathered representatives like morning mist, a new possibility began to emerge from the seemingly impossible situation they faced. Instead of choosing between competing proposals that would inevitably create winners and losers, What if they approached the crisis as an opportunity to demonstrate the values that had originally brought their ancestors together in this harsh but beautiful landscape? The solution that gradually took shape through careful discussion and patient negotiation would require sacrifices from every district, but sacrifices made willingly in service of a shared future rather than concessions wrested from the weak by the strong. Each district would reduce its water usage by 1/4 during the peak growing season, but the saved water would not be redistributed according to political influence or historical precedent. Instead, it would be used to support a community-wide project that would benefit all districts equally: the construction of a series of small reservoirs that would capture and store precious rainwater during the brief but intense thunderstorms that occasionally swept across their desert homeland. The work would be shared equally among all 5 districts, with families contributing labor according to their abilities rather than their wealth. The benefits would be distributed not through complex negotiations, but through a simple rotation that would ensure every district received equal access to the stored water regardless of their contribution to the construction effort. The reservoir construction project would require engineering skills that drew upon the collective knowledge of all 5 districts while pushing their technical capabilities in new directions. The Morning Star District's expertise with soil preparation and crop rotation would be essential for selecting sites where water could be stored without creating erosion problems or interfering with existing agricultural systems. The Evening Star District's knowledge of medicinal plants included deep understanding of which species could help stabilize soil and prevent seepage, while their cotton-growing experience provided insights into fiber production that could strengthen the woven mats and cordage needed for construction. The Serpent's Path cultivators brought specialized knowledge of water flow patterns and seasonal timing that would determine when and how the reservoirs should be filled and emptied to maximize their effectiveness. The 4th District's basket-making skills translated directly into the construction of large-scale woven barriers and filtration systems, while their understanding of reed ecology provided crucial insights into natural water purification methods. The 5th District waterkeeper's knowledge of underground hydrology would guide the placement and depth of the new storage facilities to ensure they complemented rather than competed with existing water sources. As the sun reached its zenith and the heat began to build toward the crushing intensity of afternoon, the representatives made their decision through the ancient process of consensus that had served their ancestors well. No formal vote was taken. No tallies were recorded on clay tablets or knotted cords. Instead, each representative placed one hand on the smooth stones that Ayanna had inherited from her great-grandmother and spoke their district's commitment to the shared enterprise that would challenge them all while strengthening the bonds that held their community together. The work began that very afternoon, with families from all 5 districts gathering at the first construction site carrying wooden digging sticks and bone scrapers, baskets for hauling earth and cordage for binding the wooden frameworks that would reinforce their reservoirs. Children who had been divided by the recent tensions found themselves working side by side, discovering that young hands from the Morning Star District were just as capable of weaving reed mats as those from the 4th District, that creativity and determination were distributed evenly among their people regardless of which canal carried water to their family gardens. Elderly people who had watched the community fragment over water rights found new purpose in sharing specialized knowledge with workers from districts they had barely spoken to for months. The first reservoir site presented immediate challenges that required innovative solutions, drawing upon the combined expertise of all participating districts. The natural depression they had selected for water storage showed signs of seasonal flooding that could potentially damage their construction, but it also offered advantages in terms of natural water flow and accessibility for maintenance. The Morning Star earthworkers proposed a system of terraced embankments that would allow controlled filling while preventing erosion damage, while the Evening Star specialists suggested incorporating certain plant species that would stabilize soil while thriving in the alternately wet and dry conditions. The Serpent's Path team offered insights into timing the construction phases to take advantage of natural weather patterns, while the 4th District workers provided essential skills in creating the large-scale woven elements that would line the storage basin and prevent water loss through seepage. The 5th District waterkeeper contributed crucial knowledge about underground water movement that influenced the depth and positioning of the reservoir to avoid interfering with natural spring systems that fed their existing water sources. Each challenge that arose during the construction process required creative problem-solving that drew upon multiple perspectives and skill sets, demonstrating how the diversity of their districts had always been one of their community's greatest strengths. As evening approached and the work crews prepared to return to their homes, the transformation that had begun in the morning had already taken root in ways that extended far beyond the few cubic feet of earth they had moved or the bundles of brush they had gathered for tomorrow's construction. The crisis that had threatened to tear their community apart had instead revealed the strength that lay dormant in their shared heritage and common destiny. The water still flowed at reduced levels through their ancient canal system. The crops still struggled against the harsh demands of an unforgiving season, and the challenges that had brought them to this crossroads remained as daunting as ever. But something fundamental had changed in the quality of their determination, in their understanding of what they were capable of accomplishing when necessity demanded the best of their collective: wisdom and individual courage. As families made their way home along the familiar paths that connected their districts, they carried with them a renewed sense of possibility that had been missing from their conversations for too many moons. The children who had worked alongside adults from different districts chattered excitedly about techniques they had learned and friendships they had formed, while their parents discussed plans for sharing resources and knowledge that extended far beyond the immediate construction project. Under the vast canopy of stars that had watched over countless generations of their people, the village settled into an evening routine that felt both familiar and subtly different from all the evenings that had come before. In the morning Star District, parents spoke to their children about the day's decisions and the work that lay ahead, but their words carried hope rather than the desperate worry that had characterized recent discussions about the future. In the evening Star Gardens, families tended their struggling plants with renewed patience, understanding that the extra effort required now was an investment in techniques and relationships that would serve them well when abundance returned to their desert homeland. The Serpent's Path. Cultivators gathered around their evening fires to plan the specific contributions their district would make to the reservoir construction, sharing ideas and innovations that drew upon their particular expertise with water management and soil conservation. Throughout the village, conversations that had been strained by months of conflict began to flow more naturally as people rediscovered their connections to neighbors they had come to see as competitors rather than collaborators. In the 4th District, the basket makers who had feared for their traditional way of life began to envision how the new water storage system might actually enhance their craft by providing more reliable moisture for the reed beds that supplied their raw materials. The 5th District waterkeeper made her final rounds of the evening, checking the sacred springs and the channels that fed the community wells, but her inspection carried a different quality now than it had for many weeks. She was no longer a guardian protecting scarce resources against competing claims, but rather a steward participating in a larger vision that honored both the gifts of the past and the needs of the future. The springs themselves seemed to respond to this shift in perspective, their flow appearing slightly stronger in the starlight, their voice more musical as water bubbled up from the mysterious depths where underground rivers followed their ancient courses through stone and sand. As she completed her rounds and returned to her dwelling, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that the decision made this day would be remembered not as a desperate compromise forced by crisis, but as a conscious choice to honor the best. Traditions of their ancestors while adapting to challenges those ancestors could never have imagined. The days that followed brought steady progress on the reservoir construction, along with subtler changes that promised to outlast the immediate crisis. Children from different districts who had worked together began seeking each other out during play, creating friendships that crossed traditional boundaries. young adults contemplating abandonment found themselves invested in the community project and began envisioning futures combining innovation with ancestral wisdom. Elderly residents discovered their specialized knowledge made them essential contributors to both construction and broader planning discussions. The cooperative work created new appreciation for interdependence that had always characterized their desert homeland. As the night deepened and the village settled into sleep, the desert wind carried the scent of distant mountains where snow still clung to the highest peaks and storm clouds gathered around summits that fed the headwaters of their life-giving canals. The weather patterns that had created their current crisis might persist for seasons yet to come, but the community was no longer hostage to circumstances beyond their control. They had rediscovered their capacity to adapt and innovate, while remaining true to the values that had sustained their ancestors through countless challenges. The cottonwood tree that had witnessed so many water councils stood sentinel over the plaza where representatives had made their crucial decision, its deep roots tapping into groundwater sources that connected it to the same underground network that fed their springs and sustained their hope. In its rustling leaves, the patient observer might hear echoes of all the voices that had gathered beneath its spreading branches to wrestle with difficult choices and find pathways forward through seemingly impossible circumstances. Tomorrow would bring continued construction work and the ongoing challenge of managing reduced water, but tonight the village rested secure in their choice of cooperation over conflict, shared destiny over individual survival.